Obviously, tonight we want to do the second part of the intro, if I can use that, which is describing what really can be called the golden age of the Jews in Poland in the cultural sense and even in the political one in a certain way. So last week I tried to lay the foundations of this by saying how the Jews came to Poland, and not only did they come to Poland in terms of quantity but also quality. Not only did Jews physically come to Poland, but Jewish culture came to Poland, and not only Jewish culture but perhaps in its most religious variety. So we can really, without using cliches, saying there was a real Torah culture that starts tempestuously. There's a lot of strong personalities there and a lot of fights and all the rest of it, and that'll be characteristic of Jewish society in Poland for the hundreds of years that they're there. It's always machlokes, it's always difference of opinion. As one side of a basic dynamic, the other side is the opposite of that. Like any shul or any community in the world, there's the forces that motivate for change and the forces and controversy, and those that do the opposite direction, try to put things together, try to mend fences, try to get everybody on the same page. Both tendencies will reach a very powerful peak in Poland. The machlokes we have touched on and will be, as I say before, a basic feature of all Jewish community life. It's also true that the Jews in Poland will found what they call the Vad Arba Arotzos, which means that all the Jewish communities in Poland, that whole area, let's go to the beginning of the first map. I mean, here's an area of the Kingdom of Poland. As you see at the bottom, it's Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, as I said before. Is a fairly large area, and basically all of Eastern Europe. So there are hundreds and hundreds of Jewish communities over there, and one of the things they're going to do is, copying what the Poles do, they'll have national conventions. And really at these national conventions, they will try seriously to legislate for Jewish communities at a national level. That had almost never been done. You'd have to go back to ancient times to find something like that. You get what I'm saying? All the communities in what they call the Arba Rosa, the four parts of Poland. Without going into the details, those in the northeast, the northwest, the southeast and southwest would come together as the Polish non-Jews did, as the nobles did, once or twice a year. And I'll explain this as I go on, in order to try to pass takonas and things of national importance, meaning national importance of all the Jews in Poland, and the Poles let them do it. And so it's really, I won't say the apotheosis of a state within a state, but it comes close to that. So it's really quite a remarkable period in Jewish history. You didn't have this in Spain or in Italy or in France or other countries, or certainly in Germany, but you did have it in Poland. So it's really kind of interesting in that regard. Yes, they did have their own courts. That was not unique in Poland, but hold that thought. All right, and it's a good question. Hold that thought. That's a complex question. So those are the ones you can't answer very easily. What? Well, in the beginning, the king of Poland tried to give Rav Shalom Shachna, who we talked about it last week, power even to issue death penalty, and then the Jews themselves didn't like that. I don't think most of us would like a rabbinical court in Baltimore to have death penalty. Right? Raise your hands if you're in favor of that. That's four. That's four. Okay. So we have four liars here today. I just want to bring. Okay. What's that? Down. Negative. Anyhow, but to focus on what I'd like to talk about tonight, I'd like to divide this into two parts. At the time we have talking about what's going on in Poland, it's very, very important, laying foundations for the cataclysm that hits in 1648, and then what happens among the Jews, which is not laying the foundation for that whatsoever. They're taken totally by surprise. And the Polish side of things, the Kingdom of Poland by this time was very big. In 1569, they signed what they call the Act of Union. There were a bunch of Polish kings. Let's go real quickly through the cast of characters that you'll see over here. As you see, this guy, Simeon I, is from 1506 to 1548, followed by his son, who does those things. And then, wait a minute, let's go back. When this son dies, the dynasty dies out. That had been on the throne for a couple hundred years. They gave the Hegelian dynasty, they gave Poland the stability. When he dies, they're not sure what to do. That's when they establish what I described last week, the Republic of the Nobles, in which case you have the liberum veto, in which no law can be passed unless it's unanimous, okay? And this is basically the first guy or second guy that comes after that. He is able, Stephen Batory, a good friend of the Jews, he's able to somehow or other work within the system. Well, it's very hard. I mean, if the parliament or the diet, as they call them, doesn't want to give you money that you want, and if one guy votes against it, how are you going to have an army? How are you going to have a taxes? All the rest of it. in spite of what I said, in the period I'm talking about, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and the early 1600s, they still had enough derech eretz that nobody ever invoked the free veto. Okay, when that you get what I'm saying? Nobody would say, if the majority wants to go and do this, I'm going to block it. They had enough sense of national responsibility during this period not to do that. On the other hand, the kings were prevented from passing really strong laws because they're afraid of provoking it. So it was a funny balance. So a guy like him, who beat the Russians and took away whole cities from them, he was a powerful, famous person once upon a time, could make the system work. When he dies, huh? No, they're not. No, they're not. Yeah, that date is wrong. That's a good point. Who was that noticed? And he dies. This is just a quick march through. When he dies, they won't elect his son, so they elect this guy. Let's go back one, who's the king of Sweden, and they figure maybe we can get the Sweden and Poland together, make one big country, and that'll help things out. It doesn't. He has a lot of trouble over here, but just to show you how strong Poland was during this time, right? During this time, he came this close, if you know your Eastern European history, to becoming not only the king of Sweden and Poland, but the Tsar of Russia. The Polish army captured the Kremlin. This is the period Boris Godunov. They had their own, like Napoleon had at 1812, Poland had at 1612. People don't know this, but it's not a secret or anything like that. They were a powerful country once upon a time, even with their nutty constitution and all the rest of it. It's really very impressive what they were able to pull off. When he dies, his son is after him, and he's basically kind of weak. And at the end of he dies in the wrong year. He dies in the year that the Cossacks have the uprising, which means Poland will be without a king, it'll be weak and helpless, and the Poles and the Jews will be up the creek. So you have a quick march through of who the main cast of characters are over here. One thing you have to do, let's go to the map of Poland over here, is to realize that the 1500s is the Reformation. Until then, everybody in Central Europe and in Western Europe was Catholic for 1,000 years. And you couldn't be anything other than that. But in the 1520s started the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther in Germany. And one country after another started breaking away from the Catholic Church successfully. And the Catholic Church didn't like this. And the result was you had wars of religion, as they called it, the Catholics versus the Protestants. The new guys that broke away were Protestants. They were protesting against what they considered to be the evils and the corruption of the Catholic Church. And all the countries in Europe were up for grabs. Now, Poland was up for grabs. In the 1500s, when in all these period we're talking about, Poland came this close to becoming a Protestant country. People don't notice. Lots of Poles switched to Protestants. Okay? And at the end, it didn't work. The Catholic Church was mechazek itself after 50 years of lethargy, and they did what they called the Counter-Reformation, and they got back a lot of their countries. So by the time it's over, all the Protestants have England and Netherlands and Scandinavia and half of Germany. The rest stay Catholic. Poland is a classic example of this. Why am I going through all this? Religious strife is very characteristic of the period we're talking about, and the Jews are going to be collateral damage because the Jews aren't part of this whatsoever. It doesn't matter to them if it's Catholic or Protestant. One Christian is the same as the other, as far as the Jews are concerned. But which way do things push? Once in a while, mobs will rise and burn down a Protestant church or kill a preacher, and the king will get involved, and the church will get involved, and the other way around. And the Jesuits come into Poland, and they heat everybody up very successfully. They did reclaim Poland as a Catholic country. I wouldn't be too far off if I said today that Poland, at least until very recently, was the most Catholic country in the world. Certainly one of the two or three. For example, let us, who are older than 10 years old, remember the last Pope, Pope John Paul, who was treated like unbelievably the way the Polish Catholic. And it wasn't so simple back in the 15 and 1600s. By the 1600s, the Catholics were able to reassert themselves and totally lock down and destroy any Protestantism. But it goes to show you that religion is up for grabs in the period that we're talking about, and that's half the problem. That actually didn't bother the Jews so much. The other half of the problem bothers the Jews, and that has to do with what I'm pointing to over here, the eastern half of the Polish Empire. This, believe it or not, used to be, you won't believe this, but the area I'm doing with my marker over here was Lithuania, which was married together with the Poles, and therefore became the Kingdom of Poland and Lithuania. Most of Lithuania, especially over here where I'm pointing in the Ukraine area, were peasants who were Greek Orthodox. Okay? Now the Catholics wanted the following. They say, just as we triumphed over here and crushed the Protestants and reasserted Catholicism successfully, we should be able to do that over here as well. You understand? We had a religious struggle and we triumphed by hook or crook, and we pulled it off, so we should be able to do it over here as well. Now this violated the Act of Union. Let me see over here. Just to give you very briefly over here, the period, that Lithuania, by the Act of Union, acknowledged the King of Poland as its Grand Duke, sent its delegates to the Sejm, or the Parliament at Warsaw, and accepted that Parliament as its government in all external relations. So they became a united country, but it kept its own religion, its own laws, its own control of its internal affairs. Poland, so enlarged, had a population of 11 million from Danzig to Odessa from sea to sea. So the rules were, you're supposed to leave the religion here alone. But it was a little too tempting, and the Poles started to stick their nose into this, and the great landowners who conquered and owned lots and lots of territory and people within the territory were supposed to leave the religion of the peasants, and the Cossacks, who were the people who lived here who weren't peasants, who were just wild fighters, leave them alone, and they wouldn't. And the problem is the Jews got involved in this. Because the Jews sort of had to get involved in this because the Polish landowners, as we'll see next week, the great lords of the territories and states, very often used Jews as their business managers, which really meant that the Jew, the local Jew, is the guy who owns total control of this town or village or set of villages or things like this. And so it's the old model that we remember in Baltimore. They're not angry at the big capitalist, they're angry at the Jewish guy who has the grocery store on the corner. Because that's the visible face of their trouble. Now, the guy who has a grocery store owner is really, an agent, so to speak, of the big guys. Those guys live out in the county somewhere, and they're never the victims of the riots. But the little schnook is. And the Jews over here, unfortunately, will play the role of the little schnook because they will be the visible face of the oppression, of the fact that if the Polish landowner wishes, he could say, I'm closing down the local Greek Orthodox church. Everybody has to go to a Catholic church. And how do you close down a church? Well, you put on locks with a key. Who's the guy that puts the lock on, and who owns the key? The local Jew. You can just imagine the lethal situation that this creates, which was just going to blow up eventually, as of course it did. The other half of the story has to do with the general politics of the time. Poland, again, you can't see on this map so well, but I think we did last time, is smack in the middle of Germany and Austria on the one hand, and Turkey. There's Turkey, the huge Ottoman Empire that was the whole Balkans, and Moscow or Russia over here. So these are the two big enemies and the ones they have to worry about. Specifically over here, this all matters. Specifically over here, where they have the end of Poland, is right next to the area of the Crimea and the Black Sea. The people that lived there were called the Tatars. They're Muslims, they're Vildachayas, and they were warriors forever. So for hundreds and hundreds of years, the pattern of life went like this. A attacks B, B attacks A. These guys, the Muslim Tatars, would invade all over here and conquer and pillage and burn and rape and loot and carry off every year, all the time, thousands of slaves and men, women, children, particularly the women, would get more money for that, and that was a way of life. You understand? When the winter's over and you can ride your horses and all that, that's what's happening. And of course, vice versa. So the result was the Christian groups like the Russians and in this period the Poles particularly, and the Cossacks, who were inhabiting over here, they did the same thing back. And so it's just a question of A raiding B and B raiding A, and that's how the world lived. Okay, we're not so unused to this today. Even today, at the edges of the Muslim area in the world today, there are always wars everywhere. You understand? So it was that way at that time. Now, the only thing is that there was no such thing as political correctness. So each side was equally savage against the other. In those days, The wars were unbelievably cruel, and it went on like that for 1,000 years. So you don't want to ask. Maybe I'll tell you next week, but you don't want to know what they did to people that they didn't decide to keep as slaves. How they have fun torturing and slicing people up and doing all kind of weird things. That's their idea of kicks, right? And when it goes on for centuries and centuries, nobody regards this as abnormal. That's the way you do it, business. Okay? Now, the Jews weren't fighters. And the Jews traditionally were, like over here a little bit, and, they try to stay out of the harm's way to the best they can. Every once in a while, some Jews, like some Christians or some Muslims, be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and be carried off as slaves. If it's a small number of people, so the Jews had a system to handle that. And that was this Pidyon Shavuyim tradition that we have in Judaism, which is highly developed, in which case, for example, it would happen from time to time over the 1400s to 1500s, over many, many years, that, let's say, a raiding party of the Crimean Tatars would go into somewhere over here in Poland, for example, and they carry off, I'm making this up, carry off 10,000 people, men, women, and children. Some will be Jewish. Let's say, for argument's sake, 100 Jews. 100 Jews knew. So everybody knew that what they're going to do is they're going to try to turn the 100 Jews into cash. And they'll take them down the river to the Black Sea and send them on a ship to Constantinople, to Istanbul, which is the capital of the Turkish Empire. And there's a big Jewish community, and they'll buy them. You understand? It happened, all the time. I was going to say, Jews had to develop long, long ago in the time of the Talmud, a whole network, as best as they could, as much as you can afford, of Pidyon Shavuyim committees, in which the local Jewish community has to budget a certain amount of money. You can't spend all your budget on it, but you have to budget a certain amount of money for the simple fact that in these worlds, in these cultures, slavery and raiding is part of life. And every once in a while, you're going to find a Jewish guy and a girl. And by the way, it could be a married person, it could be an unmarried person, in which case the rabbis in Istanbul will have to be in some kind of a communication with the rabbis back in Poland somewhere, who's an aguna, which husband died, which one didn't die. That was the way life was. But if you're talking about 10 or 20 or even 100 people, the system can handle it. When it comes to 1648 and 49, when you have thousands of people that broke down, that weren't able to handle that. You get it? Which community? I mean, just to give me an example, I'm making this number up. Let's say they budget, for example, $100,000 a year for Pidyon Shavuyim. So that'll cover in those days, I don't know, 20 people, 30 people, 40 people, something like that, right? Let's be generous. Let's cause 100 people. Now comes 10,000 victims. What are you going to do? What do you do with them? We don't have the money. You see? What happens to them? You see? And that's one of the things that we're going to have to deal with. So constant wars and raiding and pillaging and slavery and Pidyon Shavuyim was part of the way life was lived, and those were the lucky ones. We'll see next week that those Jews who were captured not by the Cossacks but by the Tatars were crying, and the Tatars said, "What are you crying for? You're the lucky ones. You're going to go down to Turkey, you get saved, and that's it." Right? If somebody looked like he's old, not going to get anybody, they'll kill him on the spot. But anybody who's a decent age, that look like they'll fetch some kind of money, what are you worried about? That is the way things work. So it's a tempestuous time, as I indicated earlier. It was a period of great prosperity for Poland, but it was not a period when everything was peachy keen. And if you lived in the border areas, it's a time when war is a kind of a constant. But if you live here, in the middle of Poland, you don't feel any of that, right? If you're up here, if you're living in the 1500s up to 1648, you don't feel any of that. Poland was doing fairly well. They had their strife between one set of Christians versus the other, but so what? Okay, now, for the Jews, who, as I told you last time, were brought into Poland, and particularly starting around 1500, Poles brought them in to play a role in the economy, as we bring in the Hispanics now to play a role in the economy. It's not the same role, but they bring them in to play a role in the economy. The Jews were able to use their business skills, and particularly their networking skills, to make it work. So many Jews did well. Now, many Jews didn't. Okay? The majority usually are somewhat poor, but they were less poor in Poland. Throughout this history, than people would imagine. Okay? We're used to thinking of Eastern Europe typically as a place of great poverty and distress. This was true in the modern era. Right? Poland became a place of poverty when Poland was swallowed up by Germany, Austria, and Russia. But when it was Poland, although it wasn't simple, generally speaking, there wasn't starvation and poverty. The Jews were able to make a living, usually. Okay? There's a famous speech by the Noda Yehuda in the 1700s when he moved from Poland, where he had been a rav of a community around there, in eastern Poland, and he went westward to Germany, to Prague, which was the largest Jewish community. And in his inaugural speech, he says, "I'm not used to the poverty that I see over here. I come from Poland. I never saw, the terrible impoverishment of the Jews in Germany, where usually nowadays we think of the other way around." So it is what it is. Because there was this combination of a basic prosperity on the one hand and very intensive frumkeit on the other, she had almost a perfect storm come together to create a culture which flourished in remarkable ways in the 1500s down to 1648. And this is what we mean when we use the term the Golden Age of the Jews in Poland. We do not mean, for example, the same thing as the Golden Age of the Jews in Spain. As I indicated earlier, that was a term invented by non-frum historians to highlight the fact that the Jews in Spain did a lot of non-Torah things. I'll give you an example. They were philosophers. They were poets, which they were. They were grammarians, many other areas of medicine, philosophy, not Gemara. Now, they did that too, but the historians wanted to emphasize the more broad aspects of Jewish culture. Not in Poland. They were very verfrumd. Jewish culture, as far as it expressed itself, was very narrow in the old Ashkenazic way. It was very much focused on Jewish texts and even a very narrow set of Jewish texts. It was primarily Talmudic, and that's the way people wanted it. The outstanding representatives of the culture in Poland are the big rabbis, not poets, philosophers, artists and things of this nature. And they're not just rabbis who give speeches. They're rabbis who learned the Gemara in incredible, how shall I put it, intellectual depth, to radical examples, unprecedented as far as we can tell in Jewish history. I repeat, unprecedented in Jewish history, the depth of the analysis in which they put into the Gemara. Now, rather than explain it in a general way, I want to share with you a classic description, which you should know, of this era in Jewish history, which is in a classic volume I'm holding in my hand over here called Yevei Mitzula, right? And that is a famous work that was published long ago, right after the massacres in 1650, by a Jew who survived it, and he is describing in great detail the Xeris, the Cossack massacres, on the one hand, and when it's over, he talks about the world that's lost, as he puts it. Like the way they write today, the world that was. And this is like one of the 4 or 5 most well-known texts in Jewish history. So let me get right into it. He says over here, Poland. Now I'm going to describe the way things used to be in Poland, which was perfect. And he said that, in Pirkei Avos, this is the Torah stands for Torah, Avodah, Gemilas, Chasadim. Let's get into that. I'm in a Torah. I don't even have to talk about this, he says, it's so well known. There never was a Jewish community in history that had as much Torah as it was in Poland before the. What do I mean? There was a yeshiva in every town. In his day, in the 1500s and the early 1600s, when the money was there and the frumkeit was there. So every town there was a yeshiva. And they used to pay the Rosh Yeshiva big bucks. Said he should be able to devote himself to do nothing but sit and learn and run the yeshiva. Right? He shouldn't have to go and do side jobs. V'lo yotze Rosh Yeshiva al kol hashon mi Pesach beis l'chutz, in lo beis hamenesh beis ha'knesses. And they were proud of the fact that he did not have to do, as we remember, like the Panovich or others, go around fundraising and getting involved in national politics, all the rest of it. His job was simply to stay 24 hours in the Beis Medrash, and the only place he went was from the synagogue to the Beis Medrash and back and forth, and to his house, and that's it. And they took pride in this. Okay, for Yoshev Tamid Yom B'Laila Osa B'Torah, the idea was he should get a big enough salary he should be able to sit and learn without doing anything else. And the system was that in every town they had Bachurim, which means teenagers, older students. And every one of these people got a stipend, a fixed stipend from the Associated Jewish Charities of that town. That's the world we're talking about. I said that advisedly, where the federations, such as they were in those days, actually regarded it as their main goal, or one of their main tasks, to supply the local students with stipends. And the system was that every bacher was assigned two younger students. The bacher has two na'arim. And the idea is he's supposed to teach what he learned. The older student's supposed to teach the two younger ones, like you would say today, your mechinech avrusa, to teach the younger ones what he learned that week, in order to help the older student recite and review what he himself has learned during the week. And to teach him how to do pilpul. So just regular learning wasn't the goal. They want to turn him how to be big lamdans. The younger students got free meals 3 times a day from what they call the community chest. And if you can imagine a community that had 50 families, which is not that big, a typical community, he says, at that time in Poland, of 50 households, 50 families, maintained a student body of 30 students. Okay, 50 people kept up 30 students, older and younger. And the idea would be that every trio, one senior student and his 2 younger charges. So imagine somebody who's, I'm just making this up, somebody who's like 18 years old, and he has 2 younger students who are like 12 or 13, something like that. So they would be assigned to a household. You understand? You have these 3 boys, and you have these 3 boys, and so forth. And the least was expected was that each person should have at least one bacher who is regarded totally as a member of the family. In other words, he can open the refrigerator whenever he wants. No, even though they knew that he gets a stipend, so they didn't say like this, go to the store and buy it yourself. They regard it as an honor. It's a different mentality. Regard it as an honor. Do you have someone who's learning Torah staying in your house? And as they say before, and doing you the honor of eating your food. Okay? See, the chuckles spell the difference between the cultures. Now, as he says, even though they knew each boy gets a check every week, he took pride in offering him all the food he wants. And the more, how shall we put it this way, the Shena Balabatim, right? The more elite families always had at least 3 at the table, 1 bacher and 2 boys, who they would feed 3 meals a day, 365 days a year. So in other words, it was a tremendous popular desire at this period to participate in the Limud Torah. Therefore, the result was you had very few houses. Now, he means middle-class balabatish houses, as we would say today. There always were the poor and all the rest of it, but you still had, and the people we're talking about, a fairly large middle-class and upper-middle-class element. That's my point. So you couldn't hardly find a balabatish house throughout Poland, that there weren't people learning there. Either the guy himself, even though he was a businessman, could be a lamdan, or beno, or his kids, or chasano, or son-in-law a lamdan, or barchem shulchan, or at least have some boys at the table from the local yeshiva, and sometimes you had it all at once. So you'd have the husband, the children, the sons-in-law, and the guests. Wednesday evening for dinner, nothing special, right? Thursday morning for breakfast. That's how it was. And it was like what the idea that they talk about in the Gemara. The result was an intellectual renaissance. Correct? You had just a wide body of people in the Jewish communities who were learned. He says typically, once again, if you had a community that had 50 families, you could depend on it that 20 people had smicha. Or fancier smicha or lesser fancy smicha. Rosh yeshiva al kulon, and the Rosh yeshiva was looking as the head person over there. And all the local scholars would be, abasing themselves before him. Rosh yeshiva, and they would go and attend the shiurim, which therefore were once upon a time not something that they do out in the yeshiva away from everybody else, but which was the local sport. But Kacha Yiseder Halim Yeshiva, and even describes they had one Seder Halima, one system of study in the yeshivas throughout the country. So in other words, hundreds of schools and communities all, as you'll see, learn the same Gemara every year, like the Daf Yomi style. Not the Daf Yomi style, but in the sense that everybody's doing the same thing. But Kacha Yeseder Halim Medina's Poland, here's how it worked. Hazman Hayim Masha Bachim Nar Mechuyam Lomad Eitz Rosh Yeshiva. They had something called the Zman, like we do now, the semester. But Kayetz Rosh Chodesh Iyar Tu B'Av. Right, so right after Pesach, Rosh Chodesh Iyar, until Tu B'Av, until after Tisha B'Av. B'Chorif, and in the winter, Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan Tu B'Shvat. That was the system. V'Yachar Tu B'Shvat Tu B'Av. But when that was over, that doesn't mean the semester is over. That's when you have switch time. If you don't like where you're learning, you switch to other schools. They develop their own educational culture. Okay, that's when people, young or old, the students switch from yeshiva A to B. Rosh Chodesh Iyar ad Chag HaShavuos, and for the first half of the summer semester, B'Chodesh Chodesh Cheshvan and Chanukah, first half of the winter semester, Hayilam Nikol Yeshiva Gemara Rashi Tosas Basmana Gedola V'Michol Yom Halacha. They would learn Gemara, Rashi, and Tosas as they do now in the yeshivas today, plus something called halacha. Halacha means Amud Echad Gemara and Pirush Rashi Tosas Halacha. That's the definition. They use the word differently than we use today. To learn a blot Gemara, as we say today, was called halacha. And then all these students and anybody in the community who knew how to learn, anybody Recha Torah, would close the stores on a Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday morning or something like this. After all, in those kind of days, how many customers they have? It's not like in Manhattan, you understand? So they close the stores and do everything, and stop everything, and you go to the what they call the Shir Klali, to the community. What is today a specialty thing, at that time wasn't. For Rosh Yeshiva Levad Yashav Al Kisei, they would all go to the local yeshiva, and the Rosh Yeshiva would sit like a little king. He's the only one sitting on a chair, and everybody else is standing around him. And at a certain protocol that, like Rabbi Ruderman, before he walks in, everybody's standing around, milling around the Beis Medrash, arguing with each other in matters of the Gemara until, the big man walks in. And he takes his position, and the protocol is everybody who has any questions about they were studying, they ask him because he's supposed to know everything, all their different questions, and he answers them. Then there's silence. Then he says his interpretation is his chidushim, which means his insights into whatever the Gemara that they're studying over there. And after he pointed his own insights into that, Rosh Yeshiva Chiluk. Then he gets into the heavy stuff, what they call a Chiluk. What does that mean? And this goes back to Yaakov Pollack that we spoke about last week. Shemakshe Gemara Rashi Otosa Shedivrim Sosim says, do you look for contradictions and arguments between what it says over here versus what it says over there? Omakshi Kisar Mysterious Vegevitz B'Terutzim Sosim Gamig. And you build one this, you come up with an answer, but then you ask a question on the answer, you ask a question on that answer, you answer that, and so on and so forth. Until you work the whole thing out. And this will start, something like 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning, and it ain't over till 12 or 1. And this was like a typical. Meaning, it was a world in which this kind of intensity was in there. And let me assure you, this is only scratching the surface. You know what I'm saying? I'll just really devote a minute or two to this because it's a little bit complex. There's a thing called pilpul that you hear about all the time, but most people don't know what that word means. Really, most people don't know what the word is. But I'm going to tell you. It's a term it's a certain type of set of reading strategies. Okay? It's a name, a generic name that covers a lot of different reading strategies. You can read a book and just read it. That works too. Or you can read a book and highlight it. That's another way of doing it, correct? Or you can read something and say, why did he say that? Or that really bothers me. That's another way of doing it. Or you can read a book and say, well, it says this here, but it says something, the guy says something different over there, and try to work all that out. You know, each one of those are different reading strategies. In the case of the Gemara, you have to understand that the presumption of all these people is that the people who wrote the Gemara and similar works like Rashi weren't people like you and I. They weren't even great people like Shakespeare. They're much greater. They're superhuman. If you don't understand that point, then the whole system doesn't make any sense. The whole thing is based on the idea that the text that you're reading was written by people with superhuman intellects and personalities. I use that word advisedly. Therefore, when you see a word there or a phrase, you understand that infinite depth and thought went into its formulation. Now, nobody in the world operates like that you and I do. I mean, if I say to you, good morning, you can say, why don't you say, how you doing? And the answer is, I could have said that too. Whatever occurred to me was good morning. Okay? But if I had infinite calculation in what I said and made it perfectly timed, then there was no other way I could have said it other than good morning. And then you start to ask yourself, why do you say good, and why do you say morning, why this way and that way, why do you reject all the other things? So in any other area, we blow our minds if we tried to do this. But when it comes to Gemara, the idea emerged long, long, long ago that that's the way you have to do it, because this is Torah's Hashem Tamima. This is not just another book. Let's put it this way. Chumash. God wrote the Chumash. Did he write like Shakespeare? I mean, even if it's written well, is that what we're talking about? Is it written with a high literary quality? Or is it invested with infinite layers of meaning? And if it is, then you're not only interested in what's there, but you're interested in what the alternatives are that were rejected in favor of what's there. And so one way of dealing with it, one way that became popular in the 13, 14, 1500s, is to try to deal with the unspoken. It says this, why didn't it say it differently? What would be wrong with saying it in a different way? You understand? Now the problem is you get extremely speculative. And very, very few people have the brains to make a system like this work. And this was a problem that was criticized by Jewish educational reformers in Poland in the 1600s. The Maral is very famous for this, and his students, the Kliokar and others. But in spite of what I just said, the public wasn't interested in what the educational critics had to say about it. They loved this. Was a wildly popular form of learning, and the Chiluk just took it to a new level. So I'll just give you a very brief idea of what we're talking about. Let's say I was the Rosh Yeshiva in 1550 in Poland, or in 1600. So you have the boys come in, whoever it is, and you say, I guess, okay, here we go. This is going to go 8 hours, or maybe 9 hours. And we're going to start with something it says in the Gemara over here. And I'm going to point out that what it says over here seems to contradict what it says over there. If I want to be really fancy, I'll do like this. It's not what it says over here and says over here. It's what's implied. This statement in the halacha is based on an assumption. This statement elsewhere is based on a different assumption. How can the two implied assumptions contradict each other? You see, it's not even what's said there. It's what it's based on. If I want to be really heavy hitter, like Rabbi Yaakov Pollack or Jonas Anamshitz or something like that, I can take it to 14 levels of abstraction. This is based, obviously, on this assumption, which, of course, is based on another assumption, which, of course, is based on a third and a fourth and fifth and sixth assumption. Hold that thought. Now, let's take this, what it says over here, based on the difference, hold that thought. Okay? I can maybe do 4 or 5 of these, right? At the unbelievable level of abstraction, based on not what's said, but what's implied. Wait a minute. Now, hold that thought. So let's say I have 5 different contradictions over here. I'm going to offer one grand resolution to this, to tie it up like a wedding present. Right? I'm going to give one answer that will make all the contradictions tied together. Freeze, hold that thought. Now we're going to start with another set of texts. That's why it's going to take 9 hours. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to find 4 or 5 or 6 or however many, at however many levels of abstraction. It could be the third level. This isn't based on this assumption, which is based on another assumption, based on another assumption. It could be the 33rd also. Okay? And you're also going to have all kind of problems. You're going to tie it together. Okay? And we're going to do a third time, a fourth time, a fifth time, a sixth time, a seventh time, however many you want. Now, I'm going to point out to you that this bow tie is contradicted by this bow tie, which is going to be contradicted by this one also. And then at the end, you're going to offer one thing that makes it all work. If somebody can actually do that, after 8 hours of sustained mental effort, what does the student say? Oh my God. Like, whoa, right? You get it? Now the problem is, if all this is real, you know, the great criticism, or whether, you know, how do you know this really is, you know, a contradiction to that, and, you know, this ties it to you. But if you know what you're doing, I don't think there were many, but if you know what you're doing, you blow them away. Now think about what I'm telling you. Here are Jews living in a relatively small Polish town. The Poles are across the street. They're doing their thing. Here on this side is where the Jews live. Here's the yeshiva. The Poles have no idea, couldn't care less what's going on in this little building. The Jews walk out of there overawed and astonished, and they say like this: these guys across the street have no idea what's going on in the world. You know? I mean, it's their country, but they're a bunch of behemoths. You know? I mean, they're living on a very low level of intellectuality. Of course, the Poles feel the exact same way about the Jews. Okay? They say, we are developing the Polish Renaissance, which they were, and great works in art and literature and poetry and all the rest of them. The Jews are doing some stupid thing in that building, whatever they call the yeshiva, and each side cordially looked down upon the other, and that was called the Golden Age of the Jews in Poland.
Was there any parallel you're aware of in non-Jewish thinking, up to the biblical?
Not. The answer is there's a little bit of that. There. It's a good question, but I don't want to get into it. There was a little bit of a parallel in the 1100s and 1200s in France and Germany. There's none of this in the 1500s, 1600s at all, and not at the level that we're taking it at all. As you see, the Bible was taken to atomic heights in the 15 and 1600s in the society in which, as you see, they're celebrating Yiddishkeit in a way that that we don't have today. Obviously, they lived what they considered to be the life of the mind in an intoxicating fashion. Right? When they walked out of there, a lot of people say, I don't understand what he's talking about, all the rest of it. But that's part of the charm. They said, wow, look at it. I didn't understand one word. That was amazing. Okay? This really does create, you're going to laugh at what I'm going to tell you. This does create the Polish Jewish culture, the Lithuanian, the Galicianer, the Volhynian, the Jewish culture of that, which, all joking aside, if people understand what the rabbi's talking about, then they fire him. You understand? Like, I understood every word. Long ago, I'm getting too far off track, but I'll just, once again, I'll say, long ago, I'm sure many know, the position of rabbi did not involve public speaking in Poland. That job was for somebody called a Maggid. The job of the rabbi was to learn, like you see over here in Shilas and things of this nature, but twice a year, he's supposed to give the Shabbos HaGadol speech and the Shabbos Shuvah speech. Now, strictly speaking, it should be an exhortation about for Yom Kippur, for Shabbos Shuvah, and for Pesach, and all the rest of it. But they'd be thrown out on their head if they did that. And so they had to give all these very fancy, this kind of thing that I just described, so people would say, wow, that was amazing. We were there for 3 hours. We didn't understand a single word. There were two people in the front. They looked like they know what was going on. Our rabbi's just out of this world. You see? And even though it sounds counterintuitive to us today, I wish I had it in front of me. There's a wonderful book called Gedolim von unserer Zeit, which was published in 1927 by a guy named Yaakov Mark, who was an accountant in Latvia, and he's a wonderful writer. And he says, when he's describing this, he says, I know to the American reader, he's writing in Yiddish, this makes no sense, because how can people get anything out of a speech they don't understand? But he says, you have to understand the Eastern European mentality. They would see the Rav sitting there, as he puts it, with a hadras panim, and the 3 or 4 older learned people in community, and the fact that they look at this, they saw this as like the glory of the Torah, right? They just wallowed in the fact, they love the fact that you see that this is a work of infinite depth, that it looks on the front like another book, but it isn't. And that the others out there who make fun of us simply don't know what they're criticizing. Anyway, take it or leave it, that's the way it was in those days. And what did he go on to say over here after describing all this? Mechaga Shavuos Chanukah, in the second half of the semester, Rashiva and Amar B'Kol B'Chilukim, they didn't learn with that kind of pilpul that I just described, but they learned straightforward halacha. Okay? And that's the way it went over there. He goes a little bit more over here. Now here comes the, and he used to make the boys go give their own shiur, to test them if they know how to give their own kind of classes, to train them to be future Rosh Yeshivas and all this sort of thing. And and the whole country would learn the same Gemara every year. And each Rashiva had what you call today a mashgiach. And his job was to go around from house to house to make sure everybody's learning. And here again is a different feature. We're used to the Lithuanian yeshiva model, which is like centrally directed. There's a big room which is watched called the Beis Medrash. But old days, it wasn't like that. There was a room like this where the shiur was given, but the learning itself was done where you lived. So if people lived in this person's house, 2 boys would learn in the room there, and someone in the attic and over there. So how do you know they're not fooling around? So the job of the mashgiach is to walk around that small community all day long from place to place, keeping an eye on everybody, the rich and the poor, he says. And he said, and he would warn them, Shegilmadu v'lo yitaylu b'rechov. He said, I don't want to see you guys in the plaza. I don't want to see you in Temple Market. I don't want you to be Matayal B'Rechov. So nothing has changed. And every Thursday was a test that they would go to the special official, the Gabbai, who was in charge of what they called the Talmud Torah, to give the test to the boys. He would test them what they learned. And anyone who gets a failing grade, as we would say today, they beat the heck out of him. Right? That was his job. I mean, it's his privilege. It's his job to hit the boys. But Tziba Gaboy, at the command of the Gabbai, but also and they would publicly humiliate the boys. This is, of course, the good old 16th and 17th century. Their notions of, what shall I say, self-esteem were different. Remember, that's right. Well, Baltimore, Maryland, or anywhere else, not that long ago, 100 years ago, you still had public examinations. So I don't know if anybody remembers that. It's a while ago. And what's the idea of public examinations? The public's invited to see the smart boys shine, and the others not. Okay? That was considered, anyway, the idea of beating everybody up was that they would remember next week what they learned. Rosh Yeshiva, then on Friday was the second set of tests. They would go to the Rosh Yeshiva to ask them what they learned in the week. And look at this. He says, the result was, that way all the students were terrorized. And they learned well. As I say, times have changed. Chanukah, they had other times when they did tests and all the rest of it. And then comes perhaps a very, very fascinating part. This was for the first for the official semester until Tu B'Av in the summer and Tu B'Shvat in the winter. And then everybody went to Muncie, right? Or everybody went to New York is not a good example, but something. Everybody went to Philadelphia. Get it? Now, then, this is still semi-medieval. So they had these great fairs, trade fairs, in which thousands, actually during the period I'm talking about, it would not be an exaggeration to say that maybe tens of thousands of Jews and non-Jews would flock to certain centers where they did all the business. You understand? The wholesalers, the retailers, everybody, caravans from all over the world would come there, and that's where all kind of trades were meant. So all the Jews went there, so all the yeshivas went there, physically. In other words, near Israel, Lakewood, Tarvadas, they all pick up, and they all go to Muncie, or wherever you want to say, or Atlantic City. That might even be a better word. Yeah, Atlantic City, together with thousands of other people. Really thousands of other people. Yuma Deshuka, Bakayitz, Hayanosin, Al Yerid, Zaslav, Yaroslav. And some are the two big places in different parts of Poland. Was one is Zaslav, and the other one is Yaroslav. Bachorov, Lvov, and Lublin. Fine, in the winter. V'sham Haiser Rishus Biyad Abachim Norm Sheyechol Limit Ezi Yeshiva Shalomdu. That's when people switched. Get it? Everybody's there, all the rabbis, all the rashivas, all the businessmen, as we'll see before, all the balabatim and all the shadchanim. And that's when you made your switch. You switch from Near Israel to Lakewood, to Tervadas, to Wayu, whatever you want. There were hundreds, therefore, of these Rosh Yeshivas, because hundreds of communities had them. And therefore thousands of Bachrim. And there were ever tens of thousands, he says, of Na'arim, the younger students, and businessmen who came there for business purposes. And there were plenty of Poles and non-Jews there, as he puts it, because they came from all over the world for commercial purposes to this. So a medieval fair is a place where you have, for a short period of time, a mass population, which you usually don't have in those years. So it was Shidduch City. Anybody has a son or a daughter who wants to marry off, Nosal Yerid, that's the where you go. Well, let's put it this way. That is where the action is. B'sham Osa Chitun, and there you can make a Shidduch. Because that's where you're going to find, everyone will find the, as he put it, Dimyono V'zugo. Someone like you in the right Zug. And hundreds and sometimes thousands of shidduchim and chasanas were made on these occasions. So it was like a frenzy. Somebody would make a very interesting movie of this, right? Of Poland in the 1550s and the 1620s, 30s, and 40s, this period, where every year, twice a year, you have these mass gatherings over here, fundamentally founded on commercial purposes, but becoming also social occasions with a capital S. And since it was such a public occasion, everybody dressed up to the nines. He says the men and the women was big malchus. You tell me what it was like, right? It's the Pesach Hotel magnified 1,000,000 times. Because the Jews at that time were chashuv. In other words, he said they had rights. They were considered people, and therefore they did not have to wear a yellow badge in Poland. They didn't have to wear all these kinds of marks of shame, and they could do whatever they wanted, and they did. So as I say before, really, one could do a really good novel or something like that of a Yerid, as they put it, in Poland in this era, the men and the women, because you have to look, if you're out for shidduchim for your kids, you have to look the part, right? And the Jews at that time were like the sands of the sea. Those were thousands and thousands of them. But of course, then he says, until the catastrophe came. And he goes on to describe over here how they gave all kinds of privileges and honors to the Rosh Yeshiva. And, anytime you can give him all the aliyahs and this and that and the other. And the point of the matter is they treat him like a Superman. The idea was to get everybody else jealous of him. And they would learn real hard so that they one day should reach this post. Because they're a very frank society. Right? And really a society to some degree organized by businessmen, using basic principles of a carrot and stick. And that's how they ran it. I'll share with you just one really cute part over here about what he calls, that's how he describes the Torah world. Then he talks about the Avoda world, synagogues. And then he talks about the Gemilas Chasadim, the Chesed in Poland. Because it wasn't simply an elitist society. Oh, sure, it sure was. But it wasn't simply an elitist society which was totally focused on nothing but learning. The chesed over there was was unlimited. Barosh hachnos zorchim. Let's talk about for a minute hachnos zorchim. Hoyachachim or darshan orach af bekil shoy pitkin bian orachim. They had a system where they had the blet, the petek, that everybody comes in from out of town and needs a place to stay. There's somebody in each synagogue of each community who's the gabbai in charge of that, and he gives you a thing. And so he goes, with this card is worth 2 days at the Cohn family or at the Schwartz family or something like that. And it's just understood that the Cohns and the Schwartzes, whoever it is, are obviously going to honor it, or they lose their social standing. You understand? And of course, if somebody was a scholar, they wouldn't reduce him to that kind of a system. That would be beneath his dignity. I suppose he would go to the head guy, the parnas, the president shul, and he would have the pick of wherever he wanted to stay. And they would show it to him, and the point of the idea was to treat him with anybody who not learned with a special honor. And each one of these was worth 3 days. So you come there, you're entitled to. Now you might end up with the wrong family, but that makes life interesting. But you will have 3 days of this. If you're not treated right, you're going to go complain to the gabbai. The gabbai is going to get you in trouble. That's how it was. So in other words, once again, it wasn't left up to public-spirited, pure-hearted people to take care of the guests. You're assigned. It's expected, and you will do it. 3 days of eating and drinking for 3 times a day. And if they were going the way, they would give them some tzedakah and all the rest of it. And Misha, as he puts it over here, if people came from far away, boys or girls, they would provide them with clothes. And if someone needed a job, there were special committees to try and find people employment. And the best one of these, with which I'll conclude, was the female committee. Okay, the ladies committee says had a national goal. They had a special national, not a local, a network, national committees for poor girls. The rich ones obviously can provide their own dowries. So the rich ones are going to get married 1, 2, 3. That's the theory. What about the poor ones? They organized all kinds of special measures in every province in Poland. And the goal was no girl gets to 18 unmarried. Okay? So 18 then is like 28 today, but imagine if they had, the equivalent would be, this would not be a bad idea either. The equivalent would be, if there was such a thing in America, no girl gets to 28 unmarried. Right? And in other words, every year thing they hit the goal. So you tell me what this is talking about in terms of networking. You had national societies. You had plenty of yentas in there also, but you also had plenty of good. So people really are taking the shidduchim thing very seriously in ways that we complain about today. They had it organized down to a science, and as he puts it over here, harbe noshim tzidkonios oskus b'mitzvah zeh, and this was a famous activity of the noshim tzidkonios. In other words, in every community, as I said before, they had active committees to work like this, and they simply had lists. That's what that goes on to say. They simply had lists, and the idea is we still have 3 people on the list, and and we have 2 months to go before the year's over. Let's get it done. So there's a little bit more, but I've made my point, which is that when we talk about the phrase "the golden age of the Jews of Poland," we mean something very different, perhaps, than what was the case in Spain or perhaps Italy or other places. But it had very unique qualities of its own, and made it that Poland became, as you can imagine, the #1 in importance Jewish community anywhere in the world, and remained there even after the Cossack massacres, down to the Holocaust. And that's the bottom line. When we speak about Eastern European Jewry, it's nothing but the Kingdom of Poland, as you can see over here. Later on, the borders change, and part of it becomes Russian Jewry and Lithuanian Jewry and all the rest of it. It's nothing but the Kingdom of Poland. And in this kind of society, you give me 200 years of this, or closer to 300 years of this, and you will create such an unbelievably rooted culture that it nothing could really displace it until, of course, Hitler and people like that came along. So I conclude by saying the particular